The end of 2021 brings to a close yet another tumultuous year, both in the gaming industry and other entertainment avenues. And through the worst of times, we still find time for video games.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
For many of us, it's one of the few outlets that keeps us going when things get tough. The pandemic hit the industry so hard that studios are still feeling the effects today, but somehow still managed to release amazing games this year. Here is my list of the top 5 games of 2021 that you didn't play. Everyone knows the Yakuza series has a special place in this cold, dead heart of mine. But with the end of the Kiryu saga, there's been an empty void left to fill. Or at least there was until the Judgment series came into play. A detective thriller set in the Yakuza universe? Sign me up. And while I certainly enjoyed the original, the sequel told a story that I found myself more involved with in ways I haven't been since Yakuza 0. It has one of the best antagonists in the Yakuza universe thus far, and yes, I've played nearly all of them. The gameplay of Lost Judgment is similar to that of the first game in most of the Yakuza series, barring the turn-based combat of 7. You'll stroll around the streets of Kamurocho and a new location, Ijincho. You'll still randomly encounter thugs and gangsters on the streets, smashing their faces in, and pants so tight you'll think they were made of spandex. However, it's not lacking in new mechanics and features. You'll use new tools to find clues, join clubs, opening a slew of new minigames, some of which dig into Sega's long history. But apart from all this, it was the story that kept me going until the end. Lost Judgment is a story about a justice system that has failed its people, even the ones who dedicate their lives to uphold it. And it kept me wondering how things would come together by the end. And if it turns out that this truly is the final entry of the series, it's a strong send-off. Lost Judgment solidifies itself as number 5 of my favorite games of 2021. If you thought a game about ninjas wouldn't make it onto my list this year,
Gotcha, bitch!
but this goes a bit deeper than just simple bias. Cyber Shadow pays homage to 8-bit classics while simultaneously establishing its own identity. And to be quite honest, it's a welcome change of pace, even with known franchises adopting open world and pseudo-open world philosophies. Out of the gate, it's clear that Cyber Shadow takes a few pages from games like Ninja Gaiden, Shinobi, and Contra, not just from the 8-bit style, but the gameplay as well. You'll run, jump, and slash your way through futuristic environments, and it's certainly no walk in the park. It won't hesitate to catch you slacking by putting you in challenging situations. You'll die often, but most of the time you'll realize it was your own fault, such as missing a jump or not watching enemy patterns. But it's rewarding when you understand what you did wrong and try again to refine your execution. It also helps that the game features a checkpoint system that allows you to decide how much aid you want. Want a health refill at that checkpoint? Use the in-game currency to unlock the refill module. Want more SP? Unlock that module as well. But this system is also balanced, as these only apply to their respective checkpoints. You can also acquire new skills and upgrades that allow you to reach hidden areas in previous levels that you couldn't before, and also make you feel like a badass during moment-to-moment gameplay. Cyber Shadow is a game that rewards trial and error. Your mistakes at first may feel like a lack of skill, and it certainly is. But when learning from those mistakes, that's where the game becomes addicting and oddly satisfying, and is the moment when the game starts to click. And aren't that many modern day video games have lost as we transition into more blockbuster experiences. Cyberpunk slashes its way onto 4th place of my favorite games of 2021.
Chris? What the hell?
Sorry, Ethan.
No! What? Why?
The Resident Evil series has been on the come-up as of late. Over the past few years, Capcom has shown that they understand what fans love about the series and where they went wrong before. Resident Evil 7 was a great first indicator of this, and the remakes that followed restored my faith in Capcom. So it's probably no surprise that the sequel to Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil Village, also made it onto my list this year. Not just because I have an affinity for the Resident Evil series, but because it's a damn good game overall, though it may be lacking in the scare factor. Resident Evil Village shines through its intense atmosphere. Fans of Resident Evil 4 will notice quite a few similarities in its setting and action-focused gameplay. This is also where it diverges from 7's southern Louisiana setting. Village takes place in a variety of different environments, but this is also one of the negatives about its design. The game's best location, the castle, is over and done with far too quickly, and the following areas don't have the same character or charm in their design. But these are small complaints in a game that has a great pace and constantly throws new challenges at you. Combat is more action-oriented this time around. Weapons are also plentiful and even upgradable this time. This is the exact opposite of 7's non-upgradable weapons. Medical fluid is still a thing this time around, and the game even pokes fun at it sometimes.
Yeah, boy, let that person get in there, boy. Yeah, boy, let that person get on down to the bone.
Enemies are smart enough to attack you in groups akin to RE4, and the game rewards using the environment to manage them. Ammo is more plentiful to make up for the variety of enemies this time around, but careful conservation is still necessary. I found myself choosing whether to fight or run rather often, and the new merchant also helps when things get tough. Overall, Village is a fantastic entry into the series that takes from one of its best games. It kept me on my toes from start to finish, even with the lessened horror component. The story takes bold steps that may have shaken up the foundation of the entire series. Oh, and I guess it's fun to play or something like that, I don't know. Resident Evil Village has earned its third place spot of my favorite games of 2021. The Metroid series has always been a strange thing for me. Super Metroid was my first experience with that particular game design, and at the time, with how young I was, I didn't get it. Fast forward to my teenage years and my experience with Metroid Prime on the GameCube, I loved it, so much that I went back to Super Metroid and the other games in the series as well. When Metroid Dread was announced, I was over the moon, and now having played and finished it, I think it's pretty obvious that I enjoyed it. It put itself up there with some of the best games in the franchise. Just like the Metroid Prime series, Dread manages to capitalize on one of the things it does best: atmosphere. Some would argue that the Metroid series borders on horror as it accentuates the fear of the unknown. You land on an alien world after some catastrophe happens, and it's your job to find out what happened. The same applies to Dread, but instead of the unknown, it accentuates the fear of powerlessness. They create this through one of the game's intimidating enemies, the Emmy. The Emmy are nearly indestructible, can chase you from screen to screen, and if they catch you, it's an instant game over. Unless you have amazing reaction time and have fully mastered the counter ability carried over from Samus Returns, running is the best option. I'll admit the most teeth-clenching moments were when entering an enemy area and hoping it wasn't waiting on the other side of a door for me, which in many cases, it was. Dread's gameplay is fast, fluid, and responsive. It rewards fast reaction timing with a counter ability that can even give you an edge during boss fights, and there are many. Some even become regular enemy types in the late game. However, mastery of the counter is not required to progress. Upgrades range from the norm like the Charge Shot and Morph Ball, and new upgrades like the Cloak and Spider Climb. Environments are widely varied, and I was always excited to find out what the next location would be. And the story, by the end, also takes some bold steps that could shake up the entire series as a whole. Metroid Dread is an amazing entry into the Legacy 2D games that I would recommend any Metroid fan give a chance. The enemy are intimidating, but the entirety of the game isn't centered around them. It's one of those few games that I look forward to playing again right after finishing, which is certainly important for me as a consumer. Dread is a game that I can confidently say is my second place holder for my favorite games of 2021. The PS2 era was an amazing time for video games. Publishers were willing to give more ideas a chance, and games were bright, colorful, quirky, and charming. 3D action platformers had come into their own during this time, and it was also the era where games like Ratchet & Clank opened up the genre for me. Only a handful of games survived that era into today, and the Ratchet & Clank series is one of them. For a brief period, I wondered how and why, but after playing Rift Apart, it all made sense. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a strong example of a nearly bygone era of video games that are simply fun to play, where the foundation of its design can transcend generations of modern gaming sensibilities. It certainly helps that it's one of the best looking games of the year. Insomniac continues to show the graphical capabilities of each generation of console they're familiar with. Prior games have been measured up to Pixar films, but Rift Apart makes it hard to tell the difference for the average person. It begs the question, where could they go from here? As funny as it is to say, Ratchet's fur never looked this good. The art style pops in large open areas with dense foliage, and cities look amazing with neon lights reflecting in puddles of water. It's quite impressive in a game where realism isn't necessarily the priority. So sure, it looks great, but how's the story? Rift Apart tells an endearing story about purpose and friendship. The introduction of new characters, Rivet and Kit, are welcome even if they don't play differently from our staple duo. Seeing alternate versions of fan favorites is also a nice touch, as their personalities see a drastic change from what we're used to.
Namaste, and peace be with you, Rivet.
Where the game takes a step back for me, personally, is the humor. Some say that the series has lost its comedic bite, and I agree. It took me going back to the previous games to see it, but I found the humor to be much edgier than the previous titles. However, that doesn't mean that the humor is gone, but that it's not as punchy as it used to be. That being said, there's still an entertaining story here that I enjoyed from start to finish, and leaves me hopeful about where a sequel will take us next. So, how does this thing play? Ratchet & Clank is a good example of how simple gameplay can still be engaging and fun. Rift Apart fits this to a T. Using the game's wide array of unique weapons never got old for me. Couple that with great set pieces and enemies that are fun to shoot, it becomes a rather addictive gameplay loop. The lack of Mr. Zircon was disappointing, however. Mr. Fun Guy is cool and all, but the robot killing machine with quips of murderous intent is more fun for me anyway. Rift Apart is also one of few games utilizing the DualSense's adaptive triggers in unique ways. Different from most games making you pull the trigger a little harder than usual to shoot a gun, Rift Apart makes weapons operate differently based on how far you pull the trigger. Take the Enforcer for example. Pulling the trigger halfway only fires one barrel of the gun. A full pull will fire both barrels in sequence. This completely changes the approach to weapons in combat, and each weapon has a unique function. At the end of the day, Ratchet & Clank is an amazing return to form and demonstrates that 3D action platformers still have a place in today's gaming landscape. The humor may be a shell of its former self, but the story, the visuals, and the gameplay never lose heart. And honestly, I think having replayed the game about 4 times now makes a pretty good case about it being my favorite game of 2021.